How's everybody today? I see the typical expressions of those who have been at a long conference for the day, but I hope you guys are having as much fun as I am. I've found this to be an incredibly fun and informative day, and huge thanks to Redbird for having Preflight here. So today I'm going to be talking about something that may not have been talked about, I don't know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and that is flight training and electronic flight bags. And specifically, I'm going to talk about Preflight, as Preflight's one of the most popular electronic flight bags out there. Just really quick before we get started and introduce myself, who has heard of Preflight? That's awesome, thank you. Who has a Preflight subscription? All right, that's so cool. So, excellent. Which of your flight schools are offering a discount on Preflight subscriptions to your students?
Well, it's kind of like the same.
What's that? That's all right.
It's just like we break even, we don't make any money.
That's all right. If you didn't raise your hand, come to me afterward. We'll talk.
Or join SAFE.
That's right, or join SAFE as well. SAFE or NAFI, exactly. So my name is Ryan Bohlander, and I've been working at Preflight since this past summer. Before that, I'm a CFI. I'm based in Chandler, Arizona. I'm passionate about aviation. Quick question, who has seen the movie The Right Stuff? Oh yeah, cool. I didn't think there'd be that many hands. It's an old movie, came out in about 1983. So imagine 10-year-old Ryan seeing that movie and getting blown away by aviation. You know, it's been a theme throughout the day on when we've all been inspired by aviation. And I was inspired by that movie and Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier and then the Mercury astronaut. So I didn't see if there was anybody that did not raise your hand, but if you did not raise your hand on seeing The Right Stuff, you should go rent that movie. It's amazing, it's funny, it's inspiring, and I've seen it 20 times, and you know, it's what really got me started in aviation. However, I was inspired to be a pilot at a young age. However, it didn't happen. I had bad eyesight and didn't get laser corrected, so I went on a completely different career for a number of years. And 5 years ago, I decided to make a career change and get into aviation. So likely I've been in aviation a lot less than many of you. And so that's why it's great to learn. I'm constantly learning. I'm teaching now, but I'm constantly learning myself. I started as a private pilot student. I did not use Preflight. I did it all with paper charts and pencils, and it's nodding your head, yeah, like many of you did, but I was exposed to Preflight in my instrument training, and it blew my mind as what is capable of an EFB. So, you know, I was fortunate enough to have as one of my early CFI students be the director of sales for Preflight, and I helped him work on his CFI, and next thing you know, I found myself in this amazing position at Preflight. And what I do is I'm an account executive at for education, and my role is to go talk to and work with flight schools, and there's over 100 that are Preflight customers, formal Preflight customers now, globally around the world, and as a mission of getting Preflight into the hands of CFIs and flight students to make flying and flight training more enjoyable and safer. So, so what we're going to do is there's a lot to cover, and I know it's the end of the day, so I'm going to do my best to be as entertaining as possible. But one question we always get at Preflight is, what's new? So I'm going to quickly, don't try to keep up in your device. If you pull out Preflight, you're just going to get lost, because I'm just going to rip through a bunch of slides. As my loyal users of Preflight, many of you have seen this, a lot of these things already. But one thing that's great about Preflight is you can be really, really useful about 80% of it, but then there's 20% you may not know about. So maybe there'll be a couple things that I talk about next that you go, oh, that's cool, I'll try that later. All right, so hang on, here we go. Over the last 2 years, you know, the pandemic has been great for some people and not so great for others. Preflight, we spent a lot of time just cranking away and building. We've had 24 releases and 100 new features. So maybe you've had the experience like I have, where you just log into Preflight one day and suddenly a button is moved or there's a new feature or something like that. Like, wow, we can do that. I'm with you on that. It's crazy to keep up with everything. One of the things that we've innovated with is our profile feature. This is a flight plan from LAX to JFK. Very simply, there's the Rocky Mountains, there's the plains of the Midwest, and it's not that useful at 45,000 feet, but when you add our layers into it and our drop downs, you can get airspace, you can get icing, you can get turbulence, and clouds. So, as a training feature, and this is just talking to a student on the ground before you go anywhere, if you're looking to help your students understand these risks in a cross-country flight, start with the profile view. It's a great way to show it in a different perspective than looking top-down on the chart.
Is that for basic as well, or is that performance?
Yes, so, good question. A pro feature. So, 3D route enhancements. So, super cool. Here's that same flight plan again, except this time we have a departure procedure built in from LAX. If you click on that little globe, I think I got to it quickly, you can see with your student before you go anywhere, you can actually fly that. You can actually fly it, you can talk about it. There's a slider over on the right side, which will come up here in a second. You can use it to look at things like obstacles are by default, but there's turbulence. You can move the altitude slider on the side. You can see turbulence at different levels. You know if you're going to be going over it, going through it. And it's just a great way, again, to, one, if you're going somewhere, to actually see what you're going to be encountering, or to have a training session with your students. There's icing. Nasty stuff that's helpful to know about before you go anywhere. One thing we've added also is, I remember even as a ForeFlight user using other apps to get my daily weather. So we're great. We've had the METAR in our app for a while. We've had the TAF and the MOS in there, but we've recently, over this past couple of years, worked with the weather company to have daily reports as well. So basically, it's kind of just where you find the rest of your weather. This is for Oshkosh. Who's been to Oshkosh? Where? Oshkosh. Good. I was as a new ForeFlight employee. I went to Osh this past summer. I was amazing. If you were one of the people that didn't raise your hand, just go. And if you're going to be there this coming summer, come find me. So I'm usually hanging around the tent with the universities and the flight schools. So daily weather, it's just another tab underneath our weather tab. You can pick a date there on the right, Monday, July 26th, 8 a.m. There's not only the weather, we also give the flight conditions as VFR. That's kind of nice. Temperatures, winds, also altimeter settings, and density altitude. 4 p.m. You can scroll to different days, hourly. 8 a.m. Still pretty good weather, no ceiling, looks good. Looks like we're progressing through. We see some marginal VFR. Okay, that starts to bring up warning at 2 a.m. Probably more dangerous flight. So again, for forecasting out a few days in the future, it's a great way to get really good information. You can also get it anywhere. Some people don't know about this feature. By the way, if you're using ForeFlight and you just tap on the maps somewhere, you're going to get great information of wherever that's close to wherever you tapped. Weather's no different. So here I tapped out in the middle of Wisconsin, not really near any airports. Tap on weather, and I'm going to get the closest daily weather to those GPS, to those coordinates. So I use this feature when I go camping, and I want to know what the weather's going to be like out in the middle of nowhere. I do that. Another thing that's super cool, dynamic winds and temperatures. This was a feature that was featured by Apple during one of their shareholder meetings because it's one of our more visually stunning features, but it's also just super cool and useful for really getting an idea of what winds and temperatures look like from a broad, high-level perspective. It's just a map layer. If you go click on the map layer to the right, we have winds and temps, and there's what it looks like. You can move the altitude slider on the right side, and you can see what's happening at different altitudes. So again, oops, go back to that. Again, as a training tool, when you're using ForeFlight in your classroom, again, a great way to get a sense of what currents are doing, jet streams, etc. It's a great visual for learning.
Curious, so are what you're showing, is that live or is that just part of your recording?
It's part of the recording, yeah. So you'll definitely have a tailwind on your way home. Yeah. By the way, whenever I fly commercial, I'm sitting on the ramp and I'm looking at I'm like, how bad are the winds? Are we going into it or against it? It's great fun. Hold advisor. So this is one of the most challenging things for me as an instrument student, was using my pen and paper and scratching out holds, and my CFI couldn't do it either. Double I guess. And so ForeFlight has found a way to make this easier to teach, but also to use in the air. You build your flight plan. If you go to procedure in the right corner, you can click on that and now have an option to select holding pattern. You can now build a hold based on one of your fixes. And once you build that hold based on ATC's instructions, you can then add it to your route, and then it'll appear on your route. So if you build it correctly, it's a great, again, wonderful visual way to use it in a practical sense if you need to get a hold or to teach it to your students. Timer. This was another customer request. I was always forgetting my stopwatch for my private pilot flights when I needed time on my cross-country flight planning. Well, we've got one right here in the bottom right corner. Tap on more. On the right-hand side at the bottom, your timer's right there. You can do it as, you can count up from 0, or if you need to set a specific time, 2 minutes. If you have a hold that's 4 minutes or 2 minutes, however you need to set it for, you can set it, hit it, and you've got it. And when the timer comes up, you'll get a notification. Yes?
Bluetooth to your phone and you should watch the timer ending?
I don't know.
If you do close the app, the timer will still go off, by the way.
Oh, really?
If you didn't know that, yeah.
That's awesome. And that's why I love, because I learned stuff from you guys too. So yeah, so if you set your alarm, if you set the timer for 3 hours, it'll go off in your flight bag on the way home. Awesome. Cool.
If I could just say one thing about that.
Yes.
Now, this is great in training, but don't ask your examiner if you can use it. Because obviously you can't.
Yes, and we'll talk about that, because that's part of what I want to discuss here today. We'll get to that in terms of using ForeFlight in a training environment. So really quick, taxi routing. This is something that's kind of, you can access it in what's called ForeFlight Labs. It's a feature you can enable. It's something that's robust, and while it's not a formal rollout at this point, this is the type of technology that your students can expect when they get to the airlines as ways of keeping track of taxiing. So here we are at the runway. You can see our blue airplane icon. If you go into the taxi route, you can pick your runway, and you also have your destination, or you can build a taxi route from your current location. You receive your taxi instructions from ATC. You can tap in the different hold shorts, the different crossings, the different taxi. And you can see, if you're given a hold short at Bravo 2, you can see that you're cleared to a certain point. And so again, for a busy airport, a great situational awareness tool. And then of course we can drop it on our airport diagram as well.
How do you enable that?
That's in one of the settings. And if you want, if that's in a settings function, come talk to me afterward and we'll look.
You go to your account, go to settings, accounts, and then at the bottom it'll say ForeFlight Labs.
There you go.
I would love to see the capability to predict what the taxi route is. Like you know how you can a flight plan, it'll give you like, this is what your expected clearance is.
Right.
It would be nice to be able to see that in the taxi route as well.
I agree.
Especially for like Chicago and
which is super great, but it also can lead to confirmation bias as well.
Yeah.
If you're given something that you're not expecting, but great. Yeah. Custom tab bar, I'm just going to fly through this really quick. If you go to more, on the right you can see it says edit tab order. You can move all these tabs around to make it useful for you. So you can reorder the tabs at the bottom. So for example, if I want if I'm using checklist frequently, I can move the checklist tab all the way over on the left, because I know I'm going to be using that one first. Another way that this is also really helpful is I fly with my iPhone when I'm teaching my students, just because it takes up less real estate in the cockpit. I only get 4 tabs at the bottom, so then I'll reorder my tabs to those most specifically use in the flight. So maps, flights, airports, docks, make sure I can get to those quickly. A common theme with EFBs obviously is the challenge of using them and learning them, but there's ways that ForeFlight is built in to make them easier and more efficient with some customization. Logbook on web is a new feature. When you go to foreflight.com, you can view your logbook not just in your mobile device, but now you can view it on your desktop as well. The customer request. Augmented procedures. This is an approach you can build, KPMW. Again, this is that procedure button on your flight plan. You can go through and then you can build in your approaches. This is the ILS runway 11. I'm gonna do this quickly, but you can see that here we have superimposed onto our map, we have the approach plate. We also have the flight plan, and then also we've added the minimum altitudes for each specific step down. So a super easy way to read an approach plate when you're trying to, if you're in the soup and you need to figure out what altitude you need to be. And of course, as a training and briefing tool, you can fly those approaches as well. You'd hit that little globe icon, and we'll even include the minimum altitudes on your approach as well. All right, take a quick breath. Any questions?
Back on your departure where you showed the icing layer, if there had been clouds at your level, icing, would that have shown at that point?
So basically on that menu, you can select which different hazards you want to see. So if you want to have them all selected at once, it may look a little bit busy if you have a lot of hazards. But you can, I usually, when I'm looking at a route, I'll kind of click them in succession.
Right, but so on approach now, if you had, if you're coming down from 7,000, there's icing between 5 and 3, and would you see that on your display right there? You would see it.
Yep, if you have it selected.
Right.
All right, so electronic flight bags at flight schools. So I get this question occasionally: is it legal to use ForeFlight mobile electronic flight bag with an Apple device as your sole source of publications in the cockpit? The short answer is yes. And I'm going to provide you some references just so you know that you can refer to in the future. FAR 9121 talks about electronic portable devices in there, as long as they're not interfering with navigation in the communication system. But more importantly, 9178 provides guidance for replacing paper charts. There's an advisory circular out there that the FAA has addressed this. And then for CFIs, for signing off flight logs, and I'll get to this in a bit too, Circular 12078 allows for electronic signatures, record keeping, and electronic manuals. So there's definitely some guidance out there as electronic flight bags become more and more prominent. So one thing that I want to throw out right away, and this is, an EFB is not the end-all be-all. It's important to have a backup. If you have a couple of different devices, that's super helpful. Each ForeFlight subscription includes a couple of different devices, so if one dies, you have a second one available. I still fly with probably an outdated paper chart in my bag, just on those days when my device overheats in the Arizona sun. So what is the purpose of an electronic flight bag? Well, number one, it maximizes situational awareness and safety. Nearly every feature I talked about was a safety enhancer in some way, whether it was training them on the ground or giving them tools to use in the air. But more importantly, an EFB can really make flight planning more enjoyable and more fun. I think he gave a presentation on flying for fun. Yeah, you did. I was in there. That was a great presentation, by the way. One thing I want to mention is that flight training can get to be, students come into flight training with idealism about what their career is going to be like, and they get that first discovery flight and they're hooked, and they have a great time until it's time to do cross-country flight planning. And you go, okay, let's sit down at the table, and we're going to learn the ESB. We're going to learn the plotter, sectional. There's a lot of attrition at that point. This might look very familiar. It was to me. And so,
Worse than that is making the changes.
what's that?
Worse than that is making the changes to paper charts.
It is, yeah. There's. Are you talking about the updates?
Projections and
Yeah. There's constantly coming up with new changes, etc. The amount of paper that has traditionally been involved with flight training is incredible. I still have bookshelves full of books I never look at all. So, in terms of making things easier, especially for younger tech-savvy students, is the ability to have all of that, the capabilities of flight planning and all the research in one simple place. So what are some best practices? One thing that I want to talk about really quickly is, a lot of people don't know this, but we have a manual that's actually rather thick, and we update it constantly. But if you go to your Documents tab in ForeFlight, you can actually get the ForeFlight manual. It's in there. I don't look at it that often. I look at our training videos online. But one thing that's great about ForeFlight is, when used in a flight school, learning is generally pretty organic, meaning one CFI is going to say, hey, look, did you know that ForeFlight can do this? And then they're sharing, comparing notes, and then both people have gained in their experience in an organic way. Another topic that is common that I get asked about all the time, and I've had a lot of great debates about, is when and where to introduce the EFB. Well, we know that there's fundamental manual skills that are required. The theory is extremely important. As a CFI myself, I know that understanding how ground speed is calculated is important for understanding how an aircraft works, etc. So there's a need to still have some basic theory. But what do you think? One thing I really need to ask yourselves and your students specifically is, what are they going to be using? What type of flying are they going to be doing? Most younger flight students are going onto the airline, so they have dreams of some sort of aviation career in business aviation. Well, guaranteed, some sort of electronic flight bag is going to be with them in the future. And so it's good to have them beginning to build those skills of using that mobile device in their cockpit. So PreSolo, ForeFlight, and other EFBs have use from just looking at our charts and our maps, learning airspace, accessing documents, looking at different, using their logbook. Obviously, I talked about cross-country flight planning. For a private pilot, learning how to cross-country flight plan with paper charts and that god-awful flight log is important, maybe to do a couple times, but then they can compare their notes against ForeFlight to see if they're accurate or not. Check Ride Prep is great it's a great study tool, and obviously a lot of people find ForeFlight to be incredibly useful for their instrument training. So, how to integrate EFB into your curriculum. So one thing that I would recommend is, if you look over on the left, that's just an airport page. And even early on in a student's flight training, it's super helpful for them to know and access the data on our airport page, from weather, procedures, maps, the chart supplement. All of it can be accessed right from the airport page. In contrast, over on the right, as many of you power users know, there's a lot of more advanced features such as synthetic vision and approaches, etc., that can really be a distraction to new flight students. So there's clearly use ForeFlight as a way of, you would teach flight training in general. You don't start with power off 180s in the first week. You're doing simple things like point A to point B, slow flight, things like that. So build it in as part of the progression. Create a training outline. One of my friends at Sierra Charlie Aviation, a big flight school in Arizona, we've been working with them, and they're actually creating some training material for ForeFlight. And a lot of flight schools have done that. So bake it into whatever you're teaching. Create benchmarks for EFB skills, and also encourage students to use ForeFlight at home as a study tool. As you guys probably are aware, our Documents tab is incredibly robust. The amount of paper that students can save by just knowing and accessing the Documents tab, the FAA Documents tab. Every handbook is in there. We get it updated as soon as a new one is released. All the advisory circulars are there. if there's something that they need, it's likely available for free for download into their device. Not only that, better than the paper version, you can mark it up with a pencil. You can make notes, annotations. Those annotations will stay there. They're there when you come back to it. So I've had many ground lessons with students where we're marking up the different. This is from the airplane flying handbook. We're marking up traffic patterns. We're making notes. We talked about this a second ago. Current charts are always in ForeFlight. What's great is you can, if you live in Lakeland, Florida, but you're interested in the airspace around San Francisco, you can talk about it as a training device. This is obviously one of the busiest airspaces and most convoluted airspaces in the United States, and it's helpful to, bring it up and look at it. So again, some other ways that CFIs use ForeFlight. Through our procedures, we can build in traffic pattern trees. So on the left there's a baked-in 45 downwind approach, which is incredibly helpful to visualize and then fly. On the right, another pre-brief feature where you can see by rolling through a track log the different airspaces that the student goes through. Again, another powerful way to visually represent what can be a difficult visualization for a student. Probably my favorite teaching feature is the 3D airport. Who's seen the 3D airport preview? Good. Go look at Sedona in Arizona. It's awesome. The reason the 3D airport preview is so good is you and your student can talk about an airport, and in three-dimensional, you can look at it from any direction and talk about the terrain in the area. You can talk about the runway lighting if they're going at night. If you're sending a student on their long solo cross country, it's highly likely they have not been to that airport before. And so you can review it and check it out and discuss it. An incredibly, incredibly powerful training feature. Cross-country flight planning. So this is a plan that one of my students did one time, and they sent it to me, and I said, okay, let's take a look at that. Let's see. There it is, and we clicked on it. And you can always fly it ahead of time. Looking good so far. I don't know if I like that. Here's the terrain. As a CFI, I hope you knew that this is where you would be sending them. But if they submitted a flight plan with a certain altitude, if you're sending them on a solo, they may not change their altitude mid-flight because they had in their mind this myopic view of, I'm going to fly, 3,500, and that's going to get them in big trouble. And so they'll be skimming mountains, but if you have a conversation with them ahead of time, again, a great way to brief. We pair very well with a pencil. Something that some of you guys know about already. You can draw directly on the maps. Again, another great training feature. If you have an aircraft that you need to refuel at some point or switch your fuel tanks, you can mark that ahead of time. Often when you need to call ATIS ahead of time. Sometimes it's helpful to mark that on the map. When I'm when I'm flying into an airport and when I get my ATIS when I'm approaching, I'll just jot it down with the information right there on the map. Just make sure you know how to erase it. We've got a button. Let's see. There it is. Yep. So we get asked this all the time. Someone will show us their iPad and it's all marked up because they actually touched their finger on it and they made some marks on it. Make sure you can always clear that out as well. Sharing flights. This is a feature that is incredibly helpful for flight schools. If you go into this button on the side, a lot of you are familiar with your iPhones, know that you can then send a flight plan to your flights, your logbooks, a clipboard. But one thing that a lot of people don't know is you can send it to another iPad. So I'm sending this to Jeb's iPad, and then Jeb can accept it. And again, incredibly useful in a student in CFI training environment where the CFI can then review their student's flight plan or send them one, etc. So pre-flight, what's important about an EFB is it's important to view it as another system on the aircraft. And so we teach our students to do walk-arounds. We teach them to sump the fuel, to dip the tanks, to change the oil. But it's also important that you build into your pre-flight the understanding of what to do with your electronic devices as well. So, like I said, your iPad is like any other aircraft system. Add it to your pre-flight checklist. So a lot of people don't know that we have a fairly robust checklist feature. One of the EFB checklists that we have already in ForeFlight, if you go and find it, is a primary iPad checklist. So primary iPad charged, secondary iPad charged, iPhone charged, other portables charged, backup battery, etc. Raise your hand if you use the checklist feature in ForeFlight. I need to get better at this one. I'm still grabbing my paper one. But what's challenging is that paper checklist is usually very hard to find items, especially the emergency ones that seem to all blend together. There's nothing worse than when my CFI told me, we're having an engine fire, and I'm not like, okay, there's all the different emergencies that sort of blend together. The nice thing about ForeFlight is the checklists are organized nicely, and it's easy to build your own for your aircraft. So in the checklist tab, there's a little plus. You can add a new checklist. You can go to select the template for the aircraft that you're looking for. We build our checklist directly from the POHs. And then, so here's 172, here's a Mike model, Papa model, Sierra. You can go through and then you'll have, once you select on that checklist, you'll get the checklist from the POH. However, you can see then that each checklist is divided into the phase of the flight. Pre-flight is going to be here. Then, of course, you can just go down the left side, which is going to have a call out for the right. So this saves the hassle of trying to find on a two-sided laminated piece of paper, trying to find exactly where you're looking for. It's a lot easier to keep a checklist organized on the left with more detail on the right. There's a cruise checklist. You can also edit a checklist. One thing that a lot of times that individuals find helpful, I know that in a lot of this in the Cessna 172 checklist, there isn't anything about an ATIS or calling tower or a taxi brief. I know that with my students, I've had them insert a custom taxi brief item in their checklist. Quick word on the Sentry. Who's got a Sentry? Awesome, very cool. Sentries are great. Sentries allow an aircraft to get ADSB so they can get traffic and weather in the plane as well. Weather, not quite as important in Arizona, but in the Southwest practice area, south of Chandler, Arizona, where I train, many different training aircraft flying erratically. And having traffic when you're a CFI and you need to keep your students safe, critical. Situational awareness, again, the theme of the presentation, keeping an idea of where we're going, what we're doing. We have breadcrumbs that you can enable within ForeFlight. Breadcrumbs are a great debrief because you can see these are what steep turns look like. If you do them correctly, the circles are the same size. If they're off, they're a little bit different. You can superimpose this over a VFR sectional, and you can see how crooked or oval or what a perfect circle your student is making when they're doing ground reference, how well they're finding their traffic patterns. One thing that we use that's also super helpful that a lot of people don't know is custom content and map layers. This is a map layer that's a custom content that we built for UND and in North Dakota, and this gives an idea of boundaries for different practice areas. There's another one that I use personally in Arizona, Sierra Charlie, you guys might use this one too, that gives all of the call-outs that are only known to the flight schools in terms of where the visual references on the ground. So while Maricopa Mountain is not charted on the VFR sectional, all the students know where it is. And because there's a map layer, that is agreed upon by the flight schools. So again, a great way to keep people safe and organized in the air.
Can you write your own map layers?
Mm-hmm.
You can.
You can create your own content.
So like for a flight school, you could do the practice area and put it in as a layer.
Absolutely.
And where do you add that?
It's through a KML file. It's a little, there's content and videos on how to do that. It's a little bit more advanced, but it's also a one-time thing. Once you're able to build your map layer, you can put it in there. I've talked to many organizations that are creating their own map layers in remote areas for bush flying, right? Do you do that? Awesome. Awesome.
Do you need to have a pro account to be able to do this? Or?
Not for map layers.
For map layers.
Yeah, map layers are just as long as you develop them and import them in. A lot of times map layers are available online from, like there's a local flight training organization that kind of oversees all of the flight schools in Arizona. A safety group, and they have published map layers that you can just go to their website and download and import them into ForFlight, so that everybody's on the same page. Yes?
There's one that you folks give out, and it's amazing how closely it relates to VMAX stuff that the FAA did on congested airspace and where potential near misses are. And it's ATM file I downloaded the other day.
Yeah, it's
As an instructor tells me eyeballs out in this area.
awesome. Yeah, love that. I work with a group that goes into Mexico and rescues victims of human trafficking, and they've mapped runways and places to land in ForFlight. So, yeah, very gratifying. And so then just know that that's a feature that you can create and use. Synthetic vision, another more advanced feature, but just it serves as an external attitude indicator if you have a system failure. Again, something that can connect to your aircraft if you have the proper hardware that really gives you another, we don't particularly want to be an avionics company, but this is something that's available in a pinch if you need it. So something that is part of your training in EFBs, I have been preparing for important flights at various times in the summertime. Same in Florida when it's incredibly hot and the iPad just goes out. So if you're a student and you develop too much of reliance on your EFB, this could be an incredibly, a training moment and a time when there can be a tremendous amount of nerves, etc. So this is where, as an instructor, as at a flight school, you want to stay out in front of that and have some flights where, you'll have those flights you reach over and you pull the throttle to do, you just lost your engine, what are you going to do? Build that into your training where ahead of time as a CFI, you're going to say, okay, especially if you see their head down in it. Again, this is more for more advanced pilots, but more advanced students. But practice a partial panel by removing their iPad.
It's going to happen on the flight test.
It will happen on the flight test. You better believe it. So I've heard great stories. Have a backup. So I know that it does happen on their check ride when their DPE goes and says, okay, here, hand me your iPad. Well, then maybe the student pulls out another iPad. Okay, well, hand me that one. Well, then they pull out a battery. Well, at some point, the DPE is making a point, which is well made, but the student is making a point as well that they're well trained for contingencies. What's that?
Carry all 3 and 2 batteries.
3 and 2 batteries, pretty good. Not a bad idea.
We had one girl who took it with a FAA examiner, and she had like 18 different iPads with her, all current, up to date. And he got through 6 of them, and he was like, "All right, you can have the iPad."
There's something to be said about being prepared for contingencies, but at the same time, I consider myself really prepared with my EFB, and there's been times I've gotten out there and my ADS speed device wasn't charged, everything else was. It's also important, this gets neglected a little bit too, and this, so I was one of those people that was Android for a long time, and then before I worked for ForFlight, I made the switch to Apple because of ForFlight. But it's important for a student to have basic iPad skills as well. How do you dim the screen at night? you know, for those of you who try to fly with ForeFlight at night, it's super bright, and that's very detrimental to your night vision. How do you invert the colors? Understanding generally how an iPad works, and you know the students are good at this. But having those basic iPad skills shouldn't be neglected when you're, you know, if you notice as a CFI that that's where your student is struggling, make sure to add training in that area. Always stay sharp. We connect very well with simulators. Redbird is awesome. There's a Redbird simulator that I fly in my area, and it's great how we can sort of hack the GPS chip in the iPad to make it think that it's at, you know, 6,000 feet is doing this as part of a sim. It's a lot cheaper than to train with that. You can still use, that's a great time to practice your iPad skills and situational awareness on the ground when you can, you know, just like you would other things in the air. Debrief tools. We've got our flights tab. When you go through, we're doing, you know, having a historical way to view your flights as a debrief tool, incredibly powerful. Again, you can zoom in on a track log. This is an incredible amount of information, but if you could parse it down, we have the ability to trim these now so that you can have a more focused view of your flight. But you can see that as you zoom in, you can fly, you can see how well you did on your turns around the point. Out in Arizona, in many parts of the country, we've got huge, giant agricultural fields that we use to simulate a traffic pattern. While you can put your track log directly over your satellite imagery, you can see how well you flew that field. Here's you know, traffic pattern. There's one that's a little bit more inside. If that wasn't a power off 180, it was probably a traffic pattern that was turned into base a little early. So another area that a lot of people don't know about CFIs is we have some great instructor tools within our logbook. We have the ability to do digital signatures, which are legal. We have the ability to do endorsements. And we keep a record of your endorsements. As an instructor, you can see which endorsements you've made. If you want to add an endorsement, it's just as simple as hitting a little plus button. If you need to do something new in ForeFlight, look for the plus. That's where you can add something new, whether it's an aircraft or an endorsement. All the endorsement types are there, and they're all based on the appropriate advisory circular. Logbook, we try to keep things as in place as possible to mirror the, what's it called?
IACRA?
IACRA, that's it. Like, nightmare, right? This can make it a little bit easier. So something awesome that we worked on too is this is in the spirit of making aviation fun. And this is especially for students who are used to Instagram. They're used to their socials. Everybody loves, the students love to take, and adults, love to take selfies in the cockpit, capture memories, keep it fun. ForeFlight, you can attach photos and memories to your flights. Super cool. So one thing that's super great, who's contacted team at foreflight.com before? Good, I hope it went well. Good, so I'm familiar, obviously, with our support team, and it's a lot of them are pilots just like you guys, and just like me. Pilots that are intimately familiar, trained with ForeFlight. We know that you might be stuck on a ramp somewhere and need some support quickly. So I don't want to over-deliver right now, but just know that our support is important to us. So this is a really good way to get some help. Is just emailing team@foreflight.com. So a lot of CFIs, a lot of different groups are represented. So if you have a particular logbook question, it'll be routed to that team. And if there's any delay in getting an answer back, it's likely because your question was so specific. We're looking for the particular department within ForeFlight to give you a very specific answer on a very specific feature. So something I want to talk about really quickly, and this is kind of what I do with ForeFlight. What we've created at ForeFlight is something called an education group account. And Wayman is a customer, Sierra Charlie is a customer. This is the ability for a flight school to purchase licenses in bulk at a discount from our retail rates, and then assign ForeFlight to their students and their CFIs. This is an excellent way that schools are standardizing their EFB to ensure that everybody is using the same thing. I know there's other EFBs out there. There's other apps that may not do everything that ForeFlight does, but if you kind of can cobble together a number of different apps, you can kind of, get to where you need to go. One thing we do that is only available through group accounts is when a school purchases a group of ForeFlight licenses, documents can be shared and pushed out to students. So your students won't just have access to the FAA documents, but anything that the school is able to digitize, you can push that out to your students. So if you have specific maneuver guides, if you have standard operating procedures, your checklists, anything that can be digitized is pushed out to all of your ForeFlight licenses so that they can have access to that information in their cockpit. It's incredibly powerful. The same thing with shared aircraft profiles. Within our group accounts, there's an admin account that can create a school. You guys do this?
We use it for weight and balance, and we also use it. Well, we right now only use it for weight and balance. So we have a couple of, pretty much all the fleet is pretty much in there.
Yeah, it's great. So it's a one-time thing that once you get a new airplane or when you first come on board with standardized ForeFlight, you can then push out aircraft to all of your students' devices and all of your CFI's devices. So if they're doing a flight plan, they can pull in the specific tail number specifically to your school's aircraft. Incredibly powerful. Jet charts, there's ForeFlight is also within the same overarching company, Boeing, as Jeppesen. And there's a way to purchase we have a great discount on jet charts. We can push those out to various licenses within a group account as well. And what's awesome is each ForeFlight license that is purchased by a school and pushed out to their students is cheaper than one training flight. So what's a philosophy at ForeFlight is, yes, if you go to the App Store, it's one of the more expensive apps you can purchase. But for the power and safety and situational awareness that we're able to offer, it's worth it. All right, so I'm here by myself this week. I have a couple flight school partners that are here, so network with me, come talk to me. Again, my name is Ryan Bohlander. There's my information. I have cards up here. If you want to hear more about our group accounts, if you have questions about ForeFlight, what's great about my role is I'm specifically responsible for education at ForeFlight, meaning flight schools, colleges, and universities. Any inquiry that comes into ForeFlight from the outside is eventually routed to me. So why don't, if you have a question, instead of going through team@foreflight.com, just send me an email. I love talking to flight schools. I have a passion for flight training. Come visit me in Arizona. I'm love to network, make friends, etc. And call me, text me. You can text me that number too. So again, really appreciate your time. End of the day, happy hours. And thank you for being passionate customers of ForeFlight.